Jack Arnold was one of the premier science fiction directors of the 1950s. His films covered the basis of the genre, including invaders from outer space, prehistoric monsters, enlarged creatures, shrinking humans, benevolent space children, monstrous transformations, body horror, and more. He was also a director of comedy, of westerns, of high school teen films, and of hundreds of hours of television, including sci-fi theater, Perry Mason, and Peter Gunn. He actually began his career as a World War II cameraman, working for documentarian Robert Flaherty, and then, at the end of his life, he even made a single foray into acting.
It's all right, he's a nice dog.
Appearing in a cameo in the John Landis thriller Into the Night. Despite all these achievements, Jack Arnold is today mostly remembered for his sci-fi classics. When Arnold died in 1992, the UCLA Film Archive held a retrospective screening of his work. They called it Jack Arnold, The Incredible Thinking Man. This was an obvious riff on Arnold's sci-fi classic The Incredible Shrinking Man. What I really like about this title is that the UCLA archive celebrated the brains of a genre director, which isn't the norm. Genre filmmakers are not often given credit for their cleverness, and their films are usually considered childish. The archive could easily have chosen a title from one of his comedies, like The Mouse That Roared, which could have been The Director That Roared, or they could have chosen from his many television directing credits. But they didn't. They chose one of his sci-fi films. The lack of respect for the sci-fi genre was particularly prevalent in the 1950s, where low-budget genre material was churned out for a non-discerning drive-in audience. Teenagers who was just as much there to swap saliva as they were to enjoy the thrills of speculative fiction. This was the era of so bad they're good movies, with cheap sci-fi plots throwing a rubber monster at a young and often not very convincing lead.
Help!
The films were low budget, dumb, and often terrible. So critics did what critics often do. They judged the sci-fi genre as unworthy on the whole. This despite several classic sci-fi films being made during this decade. Not until Stanley Kubrick's 1968 sci-fi extravaganza, 2001: A Space Odyssey, did the genre become acceptable. Before this, science fiction was considered childish. Or so the story goes. But I'd argue that the sci-fi genre became artistic and intellectual long before Stanley Kubrick came on the scene. Never mind sci-fi classics like Metropolis and The Day the Earth Stood Still, or for that matter, novels written by the likes of Mary Shelley, Jules Verne, and many others. However, for this video essay, let's limit ourselves to the sci-fi and horror films of Jack Arnold, and let's see if he actually deserved the UCLA moniker of The Incredible Thinking Man. Arnold's big break as a director was the 1953 sci-fi film It Came from Outer Space. The film opens with a meteor coming directly at the camera, and roll opening credits. This was at the very beginning of the 3D craze, anything to lure audiences away from that damnable new invention of television. The plot goes like this. Amateur astronomer John Putnam and schoolteacher Ellen Fields watch the meteor come down.
What was that?
A meteor.
The American as apple pie lovebirds decide to go check it out. Investigating the crash site, Putnam soon realizes that this is no meteor, but rather a spaceship. Worse, as the plot moves along, locals start behaving strangely, and Putnam rightly suspects that they are being taken over and replaced by doubles under the command of the crash-landed aliens. How do you fight your enemy when they take on the shapes and voices of your friends, and even your love interest? In a state of paranoia, that's how. This story beat makes the film a precursor for the many doubles who would soon invade cinema screens. Though to be fair, doubles were not a new idea. No matter where this concept first appeared, the motif is evergreen, and it is used effectively, and it came from outer space.
Don't be afraid.
However, the story, written by Harry Essex and based on a treatment by Ray Bradbury, does something rather unusual. Instead of the typical evil invaders, these aliens are merely stranded. They're not necessarily good, but they aren't bad either. They're just trying to survive on a hostile planet.
Ah, the dreams we had of knowing other worlds.
Listen to me. There's still a way.
All we needed was time.
Let the others go. I'll try and hold off the mob.
It made for an interesting conflict, one where the aliens weren't merely an allegory for communists among us. Jack Arnold followed up It Came from Outer Space with another 3D film for Universal Pictures. The creature from the Black Lagoon made a huge impact, so much so that it is considered one of the original Universal monsters. This despite the film being produced more than a decade after the last major original, 1941's The Wolfman. The story concerns a group of scientists tracking down an amphibian missing link. Traveling up the Amazon, the party comes to the Black Lagoon, where they discover a living fossil, the creature itself. The film is atmospheric, chock full of gorgeous underwater shots, and headlined by a beautifully designed monster created by makeup artist Millicent Patrick. The creature from the Black Lagoon inspired several filmmakers, including, quite obviously, Guillermo del Toro, who made his Oscar-winning fantasy drama The Shape of Water to right a great wrong from his childhood. He felt the creature should have gotten the girl in the end. You know, I agree. The creature is a monster with pathos. It is alone, lonely, hunted, and it has its home invaded. Jack Arnold shot the film with enough visual duality to let audiences sympathize with the creature, if they so chose. It's subtle, but it is there. Another effect of the creature from the Black Lagoon was to give audiences a fear of water. The spectacular underwater sequences were groundbreaking, beautifully shot and brilliantly performed by stunt swimmer Richard Browning. Browning would keep on working in motion pictures and television, specializing in underwater material, including as co-creator of the Flipper franchise. With the film's commercial success, Universal wanted Arnold to make a sequel. Revenge of the Creature turned the series on its head by having the creature captured, now on display at a theme park, a la SeaWorld, there for gawking human eyes to behold. Again, it is easy to have sympathy with the creature, though somehow the narrative is simpler here, mostly an excuse for a King Kong-style monster freakout in the last reel. While Revenge of the Creature doesn't live up to its predecessor, the film gave us Clint Eastwood, here making his screen debut.
Well, maybe so, Doc, but there were 4 rats in there when I changed my lights. Now there's only 3.
Are you sure you fed them all this morning?
Sure, I always feed them.
The same year, Arnold also directed Tarantula. The film was a rip-off of the Warner Brothers smash hit Them, which introduced oversized insects to global cinema audiences. Tarantula tried to outdo the giant ants with an even more giant spider, enlarged by a scientist's genetic experiments. The film never lives up to the better written and better acted Warner Brothers feature.
We may be witnesses to a biblical prophecy come true.
Though still, there are some interesting ideas in this film, including a touch of body horror from mad scientist Leo G. Carroll, who finds that his serum has some side effects.
All right, Ben. Fire 2 rockets on this first pass.
Also, hey there! That's Clint Eastwood again.
Here goes.
This time coming to the rescue of the heroes. Following this, 1957's The Incredible Shrinking Man was based on a Richard Matheson sci-fi novel. The story concerns average Joe Scott Carey, who after being exposed to a strange fog, slowly begins to shrink. And the shrinking won't stop. Doctors can't help, and as the media catches on to his predicament, Scott feels more and more alienated from humanity, including from his wife Louise.
Scott, people know, they realize they're not laughing at you.
They're not?
No.
Why not? It's funny, isn't it?
The smaller he gets, the more isolated he becomes, and things normal people take for granted, like the love of a household pet, becomes a terror. Scott keeps growing ever smaller, and at the end of the film, we leave him as he continues on his miniaturization journey, delving down beyond subatomic levels. Arnold considered the film among his best, though he didn't have the easiest time getting it made. The sad and philosophical ending was particularly controversial. Arnold and Matheson both felt it was the correct ending, but both Universal and the test audiences felt that Scott should have been allowed to regain his normal size again at the end. Had lesser minds prevailed, the film would not be as fondly remembered as it is. In fact, a happy ending would likely have wrecked the story. Sometimes, you need to leave the original Richard Matheson ending alone if you want a classic. Looking at you, I Am Legend. So good in the first hour, so unsatisfying in the last. With The Incredible Shrinking Man, Jack Arnold had crafted a film that was a character journey rather than a plot journey. This wasn't like most sci-fi films of the period, where there was a problem to overcome, usually by primitive means. Blow up the killer Monolith. Freeze the Blob. Shoot the big ugly thing. The Incredible Shrinking Man is about a person fading from his fellow humans and from the world he knows. He goes to his grim fate in the end, choosing to accept it, forgotten and thought eaten by the cat. He philosophically accepts that he will vanish, but is comforted by the thought that God will remember him, even if no one else will. Luckily, Arnold and Matheson got to keep their preferred ending.
I still exist.
And audiences got the film they deserved. After this, 2 more sci-fi movies followed for Jack Arnold. The Space Children was a hopeful anti-nuke flick, one I have yet to see. And The Monster on Campus was a strange mix of the Wolfman meets Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with a contagious prehistoric fish thrown in. Because why not? Personally, I find this film to be a hoot, but it admittedly wasn't very good, or very intelligent. After these 2 minor efforts, Jack Arnold lamented that the sci-fi genre was being watered down by cheap productions from the likes of American International Pictures. Sci-fi and horror films were not taken seriously, and Arnold gave up on the genres. He instead headed to England to make The Mouse That Roared, which was an early success for rising comedy star Peter Sellers. It was a shame we didn't get more Arnold sci-fi or horror, but the genre films he did make stood out. But were they intelligent? Did they make their director an incredible thinking man? In my eyes, Jack Arnold made 3 genre classics with It Came From Outer Space, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and The Incredible Shrinking Man. Revenge of the Creature and Tarantula both have merits, but they're not classics. And watching Monster on the Campus is a good time, but not for the right reasons. If you look at his 3 classic films, they each have elements that are today considered dated. It Came From Outer Space has an uneven pace, and it feels very much like a time capsule of the 1950s. Creature from the Black Lagoon is stunning to watch, but the character development isn't as strong, featuring archetypes of the era rather than fully developed human beings. And The Incredible Shrinking Man very much feels like a 1950s take on philosophical ideas and concepts, which today might seem dated. Yet despite these dated elements, the films endure. They are still discussed to this day. Why? It Came From Outer Space helped usher in an era of body double films. Creature from the Black Lagoon pioneered our fear of water, which every shark movie that followed has benefited from. And The Incredible Shrinking Man has inspired the sci-fi genre to approach philosophical concepts just as much as it explores adventure narratives. Kubrick's 2001 followed in its wake, and perhaps rightly gets credit for turning the tide of critical favor to sci-fi's benefit, but Arnold and others like him laid the groundwork for such critical re-evaluations of the genre. These films, It Came from Outer Space, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and The Incredible Shrinking Man, they could not have achieved such immense cultural impacts had the director behind them not approached their themes and scripts and concepts with intelligence. Perhaps UCLA's title was perfectly chosen. Jack Arnold, The Incredible Thinking Man. My name is Wolfcraft. This is History of Horror. If you liked the episode, I'd sure appreciate it if you liked, shared, and subscribed. Also, if you want to check out some of my other works, I'm an author. My science fiction novel God of Desolation is currently available on Amazon, and my upcoming urban fantasy mystery novel Richly Drawn will be available at inkshares.com in late 2021. Thanks aplenty.